I watched this video by PK Gupta about Airbnb in Australia, and I'm sorry to say he is wrong. Although he is a really great guy, I can see in the way he presents himself. So this video is to set the record straight on Airbnb for investment properties in Australia. Let's check it out.
To make huge bucks, or should you stick to a traditional long-term rental? In this episode, we'll be going through the pros or pro of Airbnb and the cons of Airbnb, because on the face of it, it seems like, hey, like, why wouldn't you do it? There's so much money to be had when you go on Airbnb.com. It's like, Jesus, this is expensive. Why can't I be on the other side? And even if I just have one or two investment properties like Airbnb without passive income, retire, exit my 9 to 5, what's stopping me doing that? I'll go through the pros and cons, and at the end, give you my synopsis, my takeaway of whether I will do it and whether you should do it. If you're interested, carry on watching. My name's PK, and I help people build passive income through the Property Investment Accelerator using data without needing a $15,000 buyer's agent every single time in this channel. We talk about property, the economy, and financial happiness. Hit the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up. Let's go. So the obvious pro, or the biggest factor that draws people in towards Airbnb is, like, let's face it, the yields, the gross yields are like 10 to 15%, sometimes less, sometimes more. I know everything that I'll say is obviously a generalization. There's always exceptions to any rule. Every law is there to be broken. But in general, the yields are terrific. 10 to 15%. You contrast that with the average yield that residential property in Australia garners. It's about 3%, 3 to 3.5%. It's like, geez, it's not even any comparison. Of course, if you're buying...
So 3 to 3.5. Maybe for houses, yeah, but I'm not sure. Is that really the average for Australia? I mean, he's probably going to be more correct than me because he's the stats guy, but that's one of those arguments where you make it seem like really far away. But I would say, not that it helps my argument, but I would say the average long-term rental yield for an Airbnb-able property in Australia is more like 4.5%, but it doesn't really matter. Let's keep going.
Top echelon, top 5 percentile yielding properties, residential long-term investments, long-term rentals in Australia. Like, of course, my clients buy it and I have in my own portfolio. You're looking at more 6 to 7% gross yield, but let's just compare it against 5%. Okay, the middle ground between what we achieve, 6 to 7%, versus the Australian average, 3 or 4%. Let's just go 5% for long-term average rental properties and then compare it to Airbnb, which is 10 to 15%. Like, that is 3 times almost, like, that's 2 to 3 times the amount of income that you're getting from, let's say, a $500,000 investment. Like, that's huge. It's hard to deny that there's something there. Like, couldn't that fast track our path to financial independence and financial happiness? It certainly could. And so I think this is a very important thing that all seasoned property investors, or those that already have 1 or 2 under their belt, they always consider, okay? But also consider the downsides. But that was the first pro. And the second pro is the
Okay, so it's good. He's outlining that it could, which is good. He's not just completely saying it's bad, like my Dave Ramsey video that I posted previously.
Flexibility. When you have an Airbnb, you can decide to rent it out for 6 months of the year, or like the peak season. Maybe it's like school holidays, or maybe it's the winter time if you're in a snowy location, or maybe it's the Christmas time if you're in a tourist hotspot. You can choose to rent it out through Airbnb, and on those lull periods, you can choose to go live there yourself, right? Like, you have that flexibility that, of course, if you have a long-term rental, 6 month, 12 month, 2 year lease, you can never live in that property. Now, of course, it's very important to separate investing versus pleasure, but if you did for some reason wanted to combine it, then Airbnb allows you to do that. So those are the 2 pros, and I think everyone knows them, but the cons people don't know. And there's lots of people trying to sell you Airbnb like, oh, this is the way advanced property investors get ahead. Let's just go systematically. I think there's about 7 or 8 cons. Number 1 is that a lot of banks actually won't look at Airbnb income for borrowing capacity. And if they do look at it, okay, if they do consider it, they need at least 12 to 24 months worth of rental statements, okay? And even if they do consider it, they shade the income that's there.
So all I know is years ago, banks were way more harsh, and now they're less harsh on Airbnb income. But I would assume you don't get many brownie points for your Airbnb income still, and they're still going to just take into account what that property would earn on the long term. I am going to explore a workaround for this soon by buying an Airbnb inside of a trust. Well, I've already done that in Perth. So my understanding is, so long as the Airbnb so long as the property inside the trust can wash its own face, which just means cover its expenses and potentially make a profit, maybe they will allow me to borrow against the equity in that property because it's washing its own face, and continue to buy set up another trust, buy another Airbnb inside that trust, and have that to continue to not affect my serviceability based on the debt to income ratio, etc.
By 60 to 80%. What does all this mean? It's like a lot of terminologies that may go over your head. Basically, even though you're getting net income from renting out your property to Airbnb, banks don't like it. They don't like the unpredictability, the high risk nature of Airbnb. And therefore, a lot of them will just say, hey, I know you've got debt against this property. I know you've got income. We're not just going to consider the income whatsoever. And so what that does is it limits your ability to get another property. Because all of a sudden you have, let's say, 500K of debt with no income. It's like, what? The bank's like, well,
Okay, so if anyone knows in the comments, please let me know on this. But in recent years, I think that they consider most of give or like let's say you buy a place for $500,000 and it would rent long term for $500 per week, and it would rent on Airbnb for $1,000 a week. If you buy that property and go to the bank, I'm pretty sure now they're going to take into account pretty much $500 a week. They'll ignore all of the a great money you make, the extra 25 grand a year on Airbnb, for example. But I think they are going to take into like more than $250 a week, more like $400 to $500 per week with Airbnb. I'm not sure if it detracts from your serviceability anymore, but I'd be interested to see. And I'm going to explore this sort of stuff myself with my Perth Airbnb in future, and I'll keep you guys updated on this channel. So subscribe if you want to be see if I can unlock the infinite serviceability glitch and infinite refinancing glitch by buying properties that go on Airbnb and do not affect our serviceability by buying them within trusts.
You got to pay that off. I'm not going to lend you any more money. That is a huge deal. And even if they do consider the income, they're like, yep, okay, you've got 12 to 24 months of history. This is, not some fly-by-the-night type of Airbnb project. You're actually in it for the long haul. We're still going to only take 20 to 40% of that income as contributing to your serviceability. So your income could be like $50,000. They may only take $10,000, $20,000. So that's going to severely limit your borrowing capacity versus a traditional long-term investment property, long-term rental. And therefore, your ability to scale a large portfolio is going to be greatly diminished. This is kind of...
So yeah, I suspect that the words he's saying about they're only going to take in 10 to 20%, I think that this is like 5-year-old information, and then it has changed since.
The unsexy part of Airbnb that most people don't tell you, but it's incredibly important. The second con of Airbnb is that, places like Ireland, other places like Manhattan, in New York, they outlaw or at least put severe restrictions on Airbnb. To be honest with you, I think the statistics are that in Australia at least, less than 2% of properties are Airbnb, but there's a lot of political innuendo and clout that goes with, hey, Airbnb is causing the homelessness and the housing shortage problem to be exacerbated. Therefore, there's a lot of voter base that says, do away with Airbnb. So that could actually happen in Australia. There could come a day where particular councils, particular states, particular cities may say, hey, we're not going to allow Airbnb at all, or you're only allowed to rent out your Airbnb for 6 months of the year.
So yeah, this sort of stuff could happen, which is a really important consideration. If you are going to buy a place to put on Airbnb, you need to ensure that you're buying in a building that will allow you to Airbnb that place forever. There's a lot of nuances around this. I'm not sure if I'm going to give that sort of information away for free, but I did buy in Perth a place that will be able to be on Airbnb forever. And I would only buy a place that can be on Airbnb forever, regardless of changes in, regulation. Rental arbitrage, where you rent a place and put it on Airbnb, I don't really care because I'm only really signing a 2-year lease, so it's not that risky. But when you're signing up for a mortgage and even maybe renovating a place for like $150K for Airbnb specific, you really want to make sure that you are able to Airbnb that place forever, because that could really fuck you if Airbnb got banned or whatever, either in that building or in that suburb or just in that city. You want to make sure that you're going to be able to capitalize on short-term rentals forever with any purchase. If you're talking about a place that you already own, I guess you've already got it, so it doesn't really matter at this point. It's really just like, okay, what's the risk of putting the furniture in and then maybe Airbnb getting banned in 2 years or some shit like that, either in the building, suburb or city or whatever. But let's get more into that when PK covers these sort of topics.
12 months. All of a sudden, if you bought this really expensive property with the intention of Airbnb-ing it, because it's very hard to quickly flip it over into a long-term rental, maybe the yield will be terrible if you do so, then it actually just shot yourself in the foot. You've made a long-term decision, and a short-term policy change has completely devastated your investment thesis and return. So that is it's a likelihood. Let's not rule it out, and that could mean a significant punishment to your return on investment. That's the second con. The third con is that, of course, there are additional fees with Airbnb compared to your traditional long-term rental. Okay, so you've got, of course, Airbnb fees itself, the platform fees, and then the insurance rates are huge. And people go on about how Townsville has high insurance rates for traditional long-term rentals. Take that and blow it up even more with Airbnb, because of course from the insurer's perspective, it's a high risk property to insure, with more tenants going in and out, more can go wrong, more wear and tear, more opportunity for a bigger payout. So which of course eats into the bottom line. The fourth con of Airbnb versus a traditional...
I own townhouses in Queensland, and I've got an Airbnb in Perth. I haven't sorted insurance on it yet, but I have sorted insurance for owners previously, and it's not there's not really much difference, maybe 50% more expensive. And we're talking a jump from, say, $400 per year to $600 per year. I haven't noticed a massive insurance premium for Airbnb, so I'm not sure where he's gotten that information from.
investment is, of course, that initially you need to kit it out. You need to fit it out. We love going on Airbnb, and when you're on holiday, you're like, yeah, this house looks really good. It might not have been like the most fantastic house, but they furnished it really well, like with great taste, and therefore you go for it. And that furnishing actually has cost the Airbnb owner, like, I don't know, $70,000, $100,000, $200,000, of course, based on the size and location and the demographics that they're trying to appeal to.
So, I mean, everything is a percent of the investment. So like a $500,000 one bedroom apartment, it would maybe cost me $15K to furnish it, excluding human labor. And most of that stuff would be brand new. So that's not that crazy. So let's work that out at like 12 grand per bedroom. So 24 grand for a 2 bedroom, 36K for a 3 bedroom. It's not that much. It's not 100K. And if it was 100K, it might be like, like what, a 5 bedroom penthouse in the Gold Coast or something. But if it was 100K, then that's like a $3 million property. It's like 3% of the value of the property, for example, or 15 divided by 500. Yeah, 3%, 15 grand of 500K, it's still 3%. So let's base it on 3% of the property's value. And then in the super blue chip locations, is really more like 2%, because you still might get a one better for $1 million, and then you spend 20K on the furniture. So I think he's wrong there for sure in the spend on furniture. You don't need to spend that much on furniture.
And so when you're buying an Airbnb for, let's say, 500K, $1 million, you've got to add, X amount, 50,000, 100,000, maybe more on just furniture. And therefore
Yeah, that is completely wrong for sure. 50 to 100K on furniture for a $500,000 Airbnb, that's completely wrong. You could almost renovate a place for 100K.
Return on investment is further dilution. Remember that furniture is going to depreciate, and with higher amount of tenant attrition, people staying 2 or 3 days going. To be honest, like, I take care of Airbnbs when I go there, but I don't take care of them as if they were my own couch, my own dining table, my own TV set. Like, I like to be ethical, but most people aren't as ethical, right? And therefore the wear and tear is more, and therefore you have to replace that furniture, and that adds to the additional cost base on a year.
I mean, it does add, but like how much? Like how much do I replace per year in an Airbnb? Maybe like $500 a year? Like it's not something that you really need to consider, in my opinion, especially if you know how to host properly. Like, that's in terms of attracting the clientele you want that aren't delinquents, deterring delinquents, knowing how to do this stuff. And then if a delinquent does book, at least having the right things to deter them from misbehaving. Like this whole thing, it's a whole holistic thing that I had a lot of problems at the start, and now I barely have any problems. Like with 25 plus properties, I barely have any problems, and I used to have loads of problems with just 5 properties. So that is something that you control. He is correct if he's talking to a beginner, but because I'm watching the video, I know that he's wrong because I've sourced the information to solve that problem, if that makes sense.
Yearly basis of owning an Airbnb property. So all of a sudden that 10 to 15% yield is getting eaten away by more and more metaphorical termites. The fifth con of...
So eroded is a big word. It's just a cost of doing business. That like there's a cost of, someone operating a cafe, I'm sure those people don't treat the tables and chairs as good as they treat their own tables and chairs at home. But is that eroding their bottom line? Not really. Not really.
Of Airbnb is that property management, they can deal with a lot of the additional maintenance and work that comes with an Airbnb, but the property management fees are higher than your traditional long-term rental fees. So traditional long-term rental properties, let's say the property manager takes 7%, 8% on average across Australia. In Airbnb, you're looking more like 20%, 20%. And even still, you need to be on top of that manager. The manager can let the ball slip. They can use tradies that are super expensive. Like let's say you've got a host and you've got a guest in an Airbnb and there's something wrong with the lighting. They send an electrician in. And
by the way, I think that is a crazy difference. Like the long-term managers getting 8%, that is ridiculous for the amount of work they do. The amount of work that a long-term manager does has got to be like 3 or even 5 times, probably 4 to 5 times the amount of work of a long-term manager, because the long-term managers do barely anything, whereas the short-term managers are doing significantly more than that. So 20% as a cap is pretty good, really, especially if you find a good one, they're actually making you 40% more than you could do it on your own. So if you are making money by having them, is it really a cost, like to give someone 20% when they're making you more money? Not really. That's like, how capitalism works well.
They don't get multiple quotes. They just go emergency, and it's like a $500 bill for changing a small little bulb that was out of reach for a tenant or for the guest on an odd hour on a Sunday, and they couldn't reach out to get there, and it was a specialized thing that required a little bit of rewiring. Like, you know, if the property manager is not doing their job as efficiently as they can, then the trades, it really ends up being a premium versus the...
Okay, so remember, yeah, he's not saying don't do it because of this. I understand that. But this is just a problem that can be solved. Like, if I was to find some management company, I would just say in the contract, this sort of stuff, like how much is it going to cost for a bulb? Like how much, like go to ChatGPT, what are all the possible things? Let's agree on the maximum price per thing. Let's make sure that they get 3 quotes before they go ahead with repairing something so we can keep everyone honest, etc. Just general stuff like this to keep everyone honest.
Tradespeople that you would get for yourself. So of course there's a property management fee, but an additional fee for the, let's say no one cares about your money as much as you do, premium that the property manager will slap you with because they're getting really expensive tradies in a lot of instances. And let's be honest, even with a property manager, you can't outsource 100%. Airbnb is never about set and forget. It's always not a passive income strategy. A lot of it's passive, but it's always a headache. Let's say on your holiday and your Airbnb back in Australia, something wrong with it, your PM is trying to call you, hey, you know, we can't reach our cleaner, what should we do? There's a new guest about to come in, are you okay with us using this other cleaner? They may not turn up on time, they may not be of good quality. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. So not only property management expensive and further eats into that 10 to 15% gross yield, but it's not passive either. And the sixth downside of Airbnb, and there's many more, is
Hold on a second. It can be passive, especially, you know, like it's pretty passive. It's pretty much the same as having a long term. Maybe it's like double the amount of hassle. Like with a long term manager, you maybe have to say something once every 3 months. With a short term manager, maybe you have to say something twice every 3 months. It's not that big of a disparity.
The occupancy rate that we're trying to achieve is, let's say, around 70%, okay, of occupancy.
That is if you have a good one, by the way.
But that's really hard. Of course, in many fantastic areas, you can get 90%, 100% occupancy, but also in other areas, it's like hard to even get 40, 50% occupancy.
So that's a concern, yeah. You can't just put any place that you own on Airbnb. You either need to buy it specifically for Airbnb and consult someone like me to check your feasibility before you buy the place to make sure that it is feasible for Airbnb. Or the place you already own, you know, show it to me, show me your feasibility so I can check if you're correct in considering to put that place on Airbnb. So for sure, not every property can just go off on Airbnb. Some will have shitty occupancy rates and it's just not even worth doing.
There's a lot of data, there's a lot of science that goes into picking where you should buy an Airbnb house, what you should be buying in that suburb, and therefore how you should furnish it and how you should advertise so that occupancy rate is well above 70%. And to get all of this right is not easy. So there's a lot of work, I would argue even more work, getting that strategy and executing it perfectly versus a long-term rental. And
for sure, way more work than getting like, you know, it's like fucking 100 times more work because you don't have to do any work for a long-term rental. You know what? He's probably right for talking to a beginner, to be honest, because some of my students, you know, when they come in, they have no idea. So there's so many questions that I need to help them to get them up to speed with the right things to do. And if you were going about it without my help, unless you're super smart, it's still gonna take a long time to have like the trial and error, know like different stuff that works that you can't predict no matter how smart you are. And if you're not that smart, you're probably pretty likely to fail without someone like me's help. So may as well show you how you can work with me. I mean, join the free community. Message me on Instagram. There's a link below of my Instagram, B&B Uni, where you can DM me the word school and I'll send you a free link to join my school community. In there's like a community of people working on Airbnb where you can chat to them and at least like network and get a bit closer to the truth and like the stuff that I know.
Shifts, markets change, and what you might find to be a good Airbnb today may not be one in 5 years' time, and it's of course really expensive to buy and sell properties in Australia. So it's a really dynamic environment, dynamic market for something that's actually a fixed, static asset. So like I promised,
I just also want to say, like, if you don't want to work with me, like just so you know how to find someone. So call every single management company in your area, ask them every single possible question. Then that's going to give you like 100 times more information than you do before you start those calls. Get in Facebook groups, have conversations with local co-hosts as well. then you're going to get a good picture of, well, a reasonable picture of what's required in that area regarding furniture, pricing, what occupancy you can expect, all of that sort of stuff. And then you can get some sort of a picture. Watch all of my content, see if you can read between the lines and learn different lessons and surmise stuff for your situation. That's what I would do if I was trying to figure out Airbnb without having to pay me money to help you.
Summary or the synopsis is, would I ever go into an Airbnb property? Would I ever buy a property and do it for short-term rental? My personal answer is no. And the reason is that 10 to 15% attractive gross yield after everything that I just, it may not be 1 in 5 years' time. And it's, of course, really expensive to buy and sell properties in Australia. So it's a really dynamic environment, dynamic market for something that's actually a fixed, static asset. So like I promised, the summary or the synopsis is, would I ever go into an Airbnb property? Would I ever buy a property and do it for short-term rental? My personal answer is no. And the reason is...
Okay, so the thing is, he is not an expert, so that's why his answer is no, and that's why most other people's answers are also no. I am an expert, so my answer is yes. So I bought a place in Perth. Let me just show you the numbers. So I bought it for around 370K, and I'm making around $1,200 a week after cleaning and after bills, or let's say $1,150 per week. So $1,150 times 52, is that right? Like 60K divided by $370,000. That's a 16%, I don't know, what do you call it? It's not net profit, gross profit. That's before I've paid the mortgage. The mortgage is around 6%, and that's only on 285K or something. So it's like 10% net profit. So PK has ruled it out, and he's kind of given a bit of a general thing to say, no, don't do it. But he hasn't said, like, obviously there might be some areas in Australia where you can get an insane return on Airbnb where it makes sense to do. Next, I'm going to do Melbourne. I'm looking at a $500,000 one bed, one bath, plus 150K reno, so let's call it 650K. And I found some examples where I can make 7,500 per month, so times 12, it's 90K, 90,000 divided by 650, that's 13.8%. So let's say, let's call it 5% to cover the 80% loan part, which is so borrowing 400K or so. You know, I'm making a pretty fucking massive amount of money. I think it was like 30K for the mortgage per year. If I'm making the 90K on the top, I'm clearing like almost 30K in net profit after all of the costs. So even if the property doesn't go up in value, I'm making 30 grand a year. So there's situations like this around Australia where it is insanely good. So you've got to be careful listening to people that aren't an expert in this field telling you not to do it because they don't have the full picture.
Is that 10 to 15% attractive gross yield after everything that I just mentioned goes down to around 7 to 10%. Okay, so 7 to 10% is now closer to the types of yields that my clients and all solid property investors are getting anyway, 6 to 7%. So why take on an additional headache and risk just to get an...
So that's an interesting point. So he did actually just end up saying it's at 10%, and then you're comparing it to the places like, basically places, people like PK, pretty much all the buyer's agents, they say to buy in the outer skirts of a city because that's the lower socioeconomic areas that have like a 7% yield, that's what I did. I bought in Logan and I did get that 7% yield. But I don't like the feeling of just not being able to put a place on Airbnb. I just prefer to have someone managing it for me and making me, 20K profit per year. Like that 3 to 4% extra, it can be like $20,000 in net profit. So he's saying, oh, why do you only want an extra 3 to 4% for all of these headaches? It's not that many headaches. It's 20 grand in many cases. I'm okay with a headache for 20 grand because like if you buy one per year, then you're getting 200K net profit cash flow from your 10 property portfolio. It's pretty fucking good, man. I don't think it's worth getting scared by everything that this guy's saying and just deciding, oh, I'll just do long term and get a 7% yield. It's like you gotta look at the nuances of stuff.
Yield, yes, that's still objectively better, but you're putting more work into it. There's more downside risk, and there's an inability to scale that portfolio because the banks won't lend to you as much as they will for long-term
So that's a key point. We need to figure out if that is still true.
rental. And let's be honest, property investing is as much a finance and lending game as it is the selection of the right type of property. So if you only want one or two properties and you're willing to roll up your sleeves, you've got
So what I'm doing is I bought in Perth, and that already had a long-term yield of like 6%, 7% in a city apartment. Melbourne is also about 6% or 6.5%, 7%. So I'm hoping that when I go for the finance, they're going to look at that, the Airbnb income, and they're just going to reduce it to slightly below. So it's still going to be like 5.5%, 6%. That's not going to hurt my serviceability, like he's saying here. They're not going to reduce it down to $200 a week, I don't think, anymore.
a lot of time, you don't necessarily work full time, and you can manage this thing yourself. You don't need a property manager. You can buy a couple of Airbnb properties in your backyard, quote unquote, so to speak, and you can manage it yourself, saving yourself that 20% PM cost, and you have like an immense obsession with customer service. Then I think this strategy of Airbnb short-term rental is for you. You can get, net around 10% yield, but if you can't do that, if you need this to be passive, if you don't want additional headache, you want to scale a portfolio, 4, 5, 6, 7 properties and make your ultimate income truly passive, and you want to diversify your portfolio across Australia to hedge your bets, lower your risk, then I don't think Airbnb is for you. Now, there's always exceptions to what I've said. This is a generalization, but you really need to be in the top 1% of Airbnb investors to do better than what I've just described, and the vast majority will actually even do worse than what I've just described in terms of the numbers. So take it for what it is. Let me know your experience. And
That's true. That's true. Okay, that was a good ending. He did actually preface that there is nuances, and someone like me will, as a top 1%, will have a vastly different experience to the average listener because they don't have the experience, so they're going to make mistakes. So if you want to become in the top 1% of Airbnb investors, or take a step to get there, sorry, I had to check with my business partner what CTA we want. So the link is in the description to join my school community. It's free, and it's a step towards becoming a top 1% Airbnb host. There you go, boys. See you next video.